We're cutting you off completely. Dad announced at the family after I refused to give my younger brother, their golden son, 50% shares in my own company. I laughed and left. The next morning, I saw 89 missed calls from my mom after they received the eviction notice from my lawyer. What happened next will shock you. I always believed in building things from scratch. There's a quiet dignity in it, in taking an idea and shaping it with your own hands until it stands solid and sure. That's what I did with Carson Analytics, my consulting firm, my life's work. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. My clients respect me, my team relies on me, and I go to bed each night knowing I built something real. That's more than I ever got from the people who shared my last name. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration, though I never asked what we were celebrating. My father, Charles, sat at the head of the table, carving the roast with the same military precision he used to keep order in our family. My mother flitted around the edges, her lips pursed in that way that always made me feel like I was on the verge of disappointing her. And Tyler, my younger brother, slouched in his seat, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. Tyler has always been their golden boy. He could charm the bark off a tree if he wanted to, though charm and character aren't the same thing. I sat there, polite, listening to the small talk and the clink of cutlery, the whole thing feeling like a script I'd been reciting for decades. Until Tyler leaned forward, his smile too easy. "You've done well for yourself, Alex," he said, swirling his wine as though he was already toasting his victory. "But it's time to think about the future, our future. I want in." I stared at him for a moment, the words rolling around in my mind. "In," I repeated. 50%, he said casually, as if he were asking for a refill on his drink. "Of Carson Analytics. It's only fair, you know? Family shares the load." I set my fork down carefully, feeling the shift in the air like a thunderstorm gathering on the horizon. My father watched me with that cold glint in his eye, the one that always meant he'd already chosen his side. My mother's face was a study in silent pleading, and Tyler just kept smiling, confident as ever. "You've never worked a day there," I said quietly. My voice sounded calm even to my own ears, but inside, something was settling into place. A final boundary I'd never had the courage to draw before. "It doesn't matter," my father said sharply, his voice slicing through the music playing softly in the background. "If you refuse, we're cutting you off completely. No more family money, no more support." I let out a small laugh, and the sound surprised me. It wasn't bitter, just final. I took a sip of wine, letting the warmth of it settle me. "Then I guess we're done," I said. My words were steady, and I realized in that moment that I wasn't afraid. Not of them, not of what would come next. My mother reached for my hand, her fingers cold and trembling. "Alex, please. Family means everything. Family should mean respect," I said softly. "But I've carried this alone for too long." I looked around the table at the people who had always expected me to sacrifice, to give without question. "Good night," I said, and I rose from my seat, every movement deliberate and sure, as if I were setting down the weight of a lifetime. The night air was warm when I stepped outside, cicadas buzzing softly in the darkness. I could feel the door close behind me, but it wasn't just the house I was leaving. It was the years of quiet resentment, of playing the part they'd written for me. I drove home in silence, the city lights on the horizon like a promise. I knew the phone would ring. I knew there would be anger and threats and all the old, tired games. But as I turned the key in my lock and stepped into my own small apartment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. My life was mine, and I wasn't giving it away. The next morning, I woke to the quiet hum of the city outside my window. The sun was barely up, but I could already feel the day stretching out before me. Clean and unburdened. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the usual tightness in my chest, the low hum of dread that always came with being tethered to my family's demands. I let the morning light wash over me, sipping my coffee slowly as if to savor the calm. Then I saw my phone. 89 missed calls, all from my mother. My thumb hovered over the screen, and I felt a flicker of guilt that I quickly pushed aside. I'd spent too many years letting that feeling dictate my choices. Last night, I'd made a decision, and I wasn't going to let them claw it back with tears and half-truths. I scrolled through the messages, pleading, frantic, and then increasingly angry. Words like ungrateful and selfish popped up over and over, familiar as old bruises. I set the phone down and let the silence fill the room again. I'd called my lawyer right after I left the dinner. My voice had been steady, even as my hands trembled a little. I told him I wanted to sever all financial ties. No more allowances, no more lifelines. The house my parents lived in was legally mine. I'd bought it for them years ago, back when I thought that was what family meant. But it had become one more way they held me hostage to their expectations. My lawyer had drawn up the eviction notice overnight. He didn't ask why. I think he understood that sometimes letting go isn't cruelty, it's survival. I didn't feel like going into the office that day. I worked from home, answering emails and reviewing client reports. The quiet felt like a bomb. Every so often, I'd glance at my phone, see another wave of missed calls, and let it pass. I knew they'd be showing up at my door soon enough, but I wasn't afraid. I'd already given them my final answer. Around noon, I went out for a walk along Lady Bird Lake, letting the rhythm of my footsteps steady me. The sun shimmered on the water, and the breeze carried the scent of summer. Fresh cut grass, warm asphalt, and something like freedom. I thought about how long I'd been carrying them, my parents and their endless demands, Tyler and his bottomless needs. I thought about the years I'd spent twisting myself into shapes they could approve of, never realizing that they would never see me at all. And now, finally, I was done. When I got back home, I found a voicemail from my mother's lawyer, his voice tight and professional. "Alex, I've received notice of eviction from your attorney. Your mother and father are upset, to say the least. They'd like to speak with you. I advise you to consider your next steps carefully." I deleted the message without listening to the rest. There was nothing left to say. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the light fade from gold to gray. The phone kept vibrating, but I let it. I thought about how, even now, they were trying to pull me back in. How Tyler was probably spinning some story about how I owed them, how I'd be nothing without them. But I knew the truth. Everything I had, I'd built on my own. Every late night, every setback, every tiny victory, it was mine. And I wouldn't let them take that from me. As night fell, I closed my laptop and let the darkness settle around me. The city kept moving outside, indifferent to the drama of my small rebellion. And for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. It didn't take them long to show up. I was in the middle of reviewing a client proposal when I heard the knock on my office door. A sharp, insistent rhythm that was almost a demand. I didn't need to look through the glass to know who it was. My family never liked to be kept waiting. I opened the door to find them there, my parents and Tyler, standing in the hallway like an accusation. My mother's face was red and blotchy, her eyes wide and desperate. My father looked more controlled, but the set of his jaw told me everything I needed to know. And Tyler looked like he was enjoying himself, a small smirk playing at the corner of his mouth as if he'd already decided how this was going to end. "Alex," my mother said, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." I stepped back and let them in, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to hear it, every last attempt to drag me back. They filed into my small office, filling the space with their presence, the air suddenly heavy with old history. My father spoke first, his tone low and deliberate. "We didn't raise you to be so cold, Alex. We're family. We've always supported you." I shook my head, cutting him off before he could finish. "You supported me when it suited you," I said quietly, "when it made you feel generous. But when I needed you, really needed you, I was on my own." My mother let out a soft sob, covering her mouth with her hand. "Alex, we're your family. We're supposed to be in this together." I met her eyes, and for a moment, I almost felt that old pull, the instinct to protect, to fix, to keep the peace. But then I remembered all the years I'd spent carrying their weight, how every decision I made had to be filtered through their expectations. And I realized I didn't owe them that anymore. "I've given enough," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "I've given everything, and it was never enough for you." Tyler scoffed, leaning back against the wall like he was bored with the whole thing. "You're being dramatic," he said, his tone dismissive. "You think you're some kind of martyr? You wouldn't be anywhere without us." I turned to him, and in that moment, I felt something settle inside me, like the last piece of a puzzle clicking into place. That's where you're wrong, I said softly. Everything I have, I built myself. And I'm done letting you take it from me. He pushed away from the wall, his eyes narrowing. You're selfish, Alex. You're going to regret this. I shrugged. Maybe, but at least it'll be my choice. There was a silence then, a heavy pause as they all realized I meant it. My father's face went hard, his mouth a thin line. My mother's shoulders sagged, and she looked away, like she couldn't bear to see me as I really was, someone who wouldn't bend anymore. I'm not here to argue, I said quietly. I'm here to tell you this is done. The eviction notice stands. The money stops now. My father's hands curled into fists, but he didn't say anything. Tyler looked like he wanted to, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was realizing that there was nothing left to threaten me with. I let the silence stretch out, feeling the weight of it settle over all of us. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of their disappointment. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I hope you find your own way, I said finally, but it's not going to be on my back anymore. I walked to the door and held it open for them. One by one, they filed out, and I watched them go without another word. When the door clicked shut behind them, I stood there for a long moment, listening to the quiet that followed. It wasn't victory. It wasn't triumph. It was something simpler, something deeper, like taking a deep breath after being underwater for too long. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing for sure. It was going to be mine. After they left my office, I didn't go back to work. I knew I wouldn't get anything done with the echoes of their voices still in my head. So I drove out to my cabin in the hill country, a small place I'd bought years ago when I realized that sometimes you have to carve out your own quiet. It was a simple cabin, nothing fancy, just a wide porch, a bed that smelled of cedar, and the steady hush of wind through the live oaks. Out there, I could remember who I was without them. The drive was long, and I let the miles unspool the tension from my shoulders. I thought about what I'd done. Cutting them off, taking away the safety net they'd always assumed was theirs. A part of me wondered if I'd gone too far. But that part was small now, quieter than it used to be. I was learning to trust the silence in myself. At the cabin, I sat on the porch and watched the sun sink low in the sky, turning everything to molten gold. I felt the weight of the decision settle over me like a blanket, heavy but somehow comforting. For so long, I'd been afraid to draw that line. To say, this far and no further. But now that it was done, there was a kind of peace in it. That night, I lay awake listening to the night sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a coyote, the soft whisper of the wind. I thought about what I wanted, not just what I'd walked away from, but what I was walking toward. I thought about the company I'd built, how it had grown from nothing but an idea and a lot of late nights. I thought about the clients who trusted me, the team who believed in me, and I realized that I wanted to keep building, not for them, but for myself. The next morning, I woke early and sat at the small desk in the cabin, pen in hand. I wrote a letter to my family, short and simple. I wished them well, but I told them clearly I wouldn't be their lifeline anymore. I didn't write it to hurt them. I wrote it to let them go, to free both of us from the cycle we'd been caught in. It wasn't revenge. It was release. I signed my name at the bottom and folded the letter carefully. My lawyer would deliver it, along with the final documents that transferred the family home into a trust, one that I controlled. They wouldn't be able to sell it, to borrow against it, to leverage it the way they always had. It was mine, and I would decide how it was used. That decision felt like a boundary, a promise to myself that I wouldn't be used anymore. When it was done, I stepped outside and took a deep breath of the cool morning air. The world felt new somehow, the light sharper and the air cleaner. I didn't know what came next. Maybe a new project, maybe something entirely different. But I knew this much. I wouldn't go back. I wouldn't let them pull me under again. I sat on the porch until the sun was high, feeling the quiet settle in my bones. It was a different kind of quiet than I'd known before, less like emptiness, more like possibility. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. I didn't go back to the city until the end of the week. I needed those days at the cabin, needed the space to let my decision sink in until it felt like a part of me. When I drove back, the sun was setting over the hills, turning the sky the color of copper and fire. I let the wind roll through the open window, feeling the sting of it on my skin. I felt awake in a way I hadn't for years. I scheduled a final meeting with my family at my office. No lawyers, no threats, just the four of us, face to face. I wore a simple black suit, not because I wanted to impress them, but because I wanted to feel grounded, certain. I waited for them at the conference table, the city skyline behind me, my hands folded on the polished wood. They arrived together, moving like a unit. My father's jaw was set, his eyes cold. My mother looked smaller somehow, like the weight of everything was pressing her down. Tyler, as always, looked amused. Like he thought this was all just a performance he'd already figured out the ending to. "Alex," my father said, his voice as smooth as ever. "We're not here to fight. We're here to find a solution." I nodded, listening. I wanted to give them the chance to speak, even if I already knew what they would say. My mother's voice cracked as she reached across the table. "Alex, we're family. We don't have to do this. We can figure it out together." I let her words hang in the air, feeling the echo of all the times I'd been to those same words before. But not this time. "I've already decided," I said softly. "This is done." Tyler leaned forward, his smile fading into something harder. "You're making a mistake, Alex. You think this is freedom? It's just loneliness dressed up as pride." I met his gaze and felt nothing. Not anger, not guilt, just a quiet certainty. "Maybe," I said, "but it's my choice to make." My father's face tightened, and I saw the calculation in his eyes, how he'd always tried to find the leverage, the angle that would bend me back to them. "We built you," he said. "We gave you everything. You owe us." I took a deep breath, feeling the last of my fear slip away like smoke. "You gave me life," I said. "But everything else? I did that myself, and I won't let you take it away." The room was silent then, the only sound the low hum of the city outside. I reached for the folder on the table, sliding it across to them. "These are the final documents," I said. "The trust is in place. You won't lose the house, but you won't control it either. I'll make sure you have a place to live, but beyond that, you're on your own." My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't look away. My father's hands were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. Tyler just stared at me, like he couldn't quite believe it was real. "I hope you find your own way," I said finally. My voice was quiet, but it felt like the strongest thing I'd ever said. "I'm done." I stood and walked to the door, holding it open for them. One by one, they stepped out, and I felt the finality of it like the last note of a song. When the door clicked shut, I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the silence. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It was release. A week later, I found myself back in my office, the city spread out below me like a promise. The light through the window was soft and warm, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, the phone wasn't ringing. No more urgent demands, no more carefully worded threats. Just the hum of my team working outside my door, the steady rhythm of a life that finally belonged to me. I'd sent my family one last message. A simple note, really, no anger, no accusation. Just a wish that they'd find their own way. I didn't know if they would ever understand why I did it, or if they'd ever see me as anything more than the boy they thought they could control. But that wasn't mine to carry anymore. I took down the family photo I'd kept on my desk all these years. It was old, Tyler and me standing on a beach somewhere, our parents in the background. I'd kept it there out of habit, maybe even hope. But as I looked at it now, I realized it didn't hold the power it used to. It was just a memory, a fragment of a life I'd outgrown. I set it aside and felt the last thread between us loosen and fall away. I thought about everything I'd learned in those quiet days since the confrontation. How I'd spent so much of my life trying to be what they wanted, trying to earn a place that was never really mine. How I'd let their voices drown out my own. And how, in the end, the only way to save myself was to walk away. I didn't know what came next, but I knew it would be mine. My company was growing, new contracts, new opportunities. I'd started working on a side project, something that excited me in a way I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about proving myself anymore. It was about building something because it mattered to me. That night, I stepped out onto the balcony, the warm Texas air wrapping around me like a quiet promise. The city was alive, lights flickering against the dark sky. I watched it for a long time, breathing in the steady pulse of it all, the quiet possibility of a life finally my own. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel bitter. I felt calm. Like I'd found the center of myself again, the part that had always been there waiting for me to come home. I knew they would move on, find their own ways to survive. And maybe one day, they'd see that this wasn't about punishment. It was about freedom. For me. For all of us. As I turned back inside, I let the door swing shut behind me. It clicked softly into place, a small sound that somehow felt final. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down at my desk, the city stretching out below me, the night waiting quietly to be lived. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was meant to be. If Alex's journey of reclaiming his own life resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on what you need to let go of in your own story. Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful stories of self-worth and quiet strength. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story of finding dignity and freedom in the face of family expectations. See you soon in the next story.